Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking the organization for inviting the Commission today. So the purpose of my presentation is to give you an overview of the regulatory system for food and feed safety in the European Union. So I divided my presentation into two parts. The first part will be related to the regulatory framework in the context of food, and the second part will be in relation to feed. So first of all, because the whole event is about the alternative proteins, is that we don't have a particular legal definition of what do we mean by alternative proteins. So there is, of course, when you make a search on this particular term, there are a number of bodies, such as, for example, this NGO, the Good Food Institute, which means, define these alternative proteins like meat made from plants, cultivated from animal cells, or produced by fermentation, which are designed to taste the same or as better than conventional animal products. So also the European Parliament, in particular, about this report of the research service, we really make a reference to alternative protein by referring to plant-based and alternative proteins from 4 sources, basically algae, insects, microbial fermentation, and cultured meat. This also reference went from the Melbourne University, which also define alternative proteins are plant-based and food technology alternative to animal proteins. They include food products made from plants, fungi, algae, insects, and also cultured meat. Also, yesterday, we learned from the American colleague that the Turf University for Cellular Agriculture also made a definition in the context of alternative proteins and by considering this product as novel food. In the European Union, in May 2020, the European Union adopted, in particular the Commission, the Farm to Fork strategy. As you may know, is at the heart of the Green Deal. And indeed, the food systems, as was explained yesterday, remain one of the key drivers of climate change and environmental degradation. So the Farm to Fork strategy adopted at that time really make a reference in the context of alternative protein, and indeed highlighted that research should be really focused on increasing the availability and source of these alternative proteins, such as plant, microbial, marine, insect-based proteins, and meat substitutes. So in a way, even 5 years ago, we were referring to that. Now, when it comes to a regulatory framework for alternative proteins in food, basically 2 main pieces of regulation may come forward. First of all is the regulation on novel food. We will come back to that later, and we will deal with the definition on regulation on genetically modified food and feed. In the European Union, the way of making some alternative proteins may fall within the scope of the GMO regulation, because that techniques in particular might fall in that particular regulation, and because novel food regulation and the GMO regulation are mutually exclusive, if it's considered as falling within the GMO regulation, cannot be considered as novel food. But indeed, also these alternative proteins may also contain, for example, plant-based proteins, and some of them may be considered as traditional ones. And in that case, we have a particular regulation, which is Regulation 178/2002, which is the General Food Law, which that particular piece of regulation may apply. Now we are going to focus on the novel food regulation in the European Union. That regulation basically defines novel food as any food not used for human consumption to a significant degree before 15 May 1997, and fall at least one of the 10 categories which I'm going to mention later on. And why 15 May 1997? It's because the date of the adoption of the novel food regulation at that time. And at that time, when that regulation was adopted, was also covering the GMO regulation, because most of the GM products were covered by that regulation. But later on in 2003, I mean, the GM regulation was, particularly the GM part was, separate from the novel food regulation, and we have a dedicated piece of regulation. And indeed, the novel food regulation, basically the aim of that regulation is to make sure that there is an effective functioning of the internal market, I mean, in the 27 member states, but without forgetting that the main goal is to provide a high level of protection of human health and consumer interest. You may remember that, that in order to consider a product as a novel food, two cumulative conditions should be met. The first one is about whether the product was consumed before or after the famous cutoff date, the 15 May 1997. The second thing is that it needs to be listed in one of the 10 categories which are already mentioned in the novel food regulation. One of the categories is about food consisting of isolated from or produced from microorganisms, fungi or algae. For example, this is the typical example of the single-cell proteins. Food consisting of isolated or produced from plants, with this particular the case of plant-based proteins. Also, and we may have also food consisting of isolated from or produced from animal or their part. We may refer to proteins isolated, for example, from cow's milk. And the well-defined category food consisting of isolated from or produced from cell culture or tissue culture derived from animal, plants, microorganisms, fungi, or algae. This is the typical category which all the cell-based products are covered in that case. And of course, we also may have the category that the possibility that we may use a particular food production process not used before the famous 15 May 1997, which indeed gives rise to significant change in the composition of the product. So indeed, we have a number of categories over there. How we can authorize a novel food in the European Union? So 3 conditions should be met. The first one is that the product should be safe. The second one is that the product to be placed on the market should not mislead consumer. With, a number of speakers were referring about in the context of alternative proteins and in particular on cell-based products about consumer perception, how these products should be named. Under the novel food regulation, we clearly define the legal name of the product, and we make sure the Commission, together with the member state, that by putting the legal name, the aim is not to, that the consumer cannot be misled in that sense. And the third condition is about the novel food should not be nutritionally disadvantageous when it's intended to replace another food. The first condition and the third one, is carried out by the European Food Safety Authority in the context of the risk assessment. How this authorization process, takes place. Here, because the regulation, the initial one was adopted in 15 May 1997, we have like a pretty much 20 years of that regulation, and then, in 2015, in December 2015, the new regulation on novel food was adopted, taking into account the number of shortcomings under the former novel food regulation, and the new one, not already new one because it's really pretty much 5 years already, took on board the number of shortcomings and improved considerably the regulation. And then we have a centralized system in place where any product which is considered novel food is subject to a pre-market authorization, which means that an application must be submitted to the European Commission. And when the product is submitted to the Commission, in that sense, we have to carry out what we call the validity check on the application. And what we mean by that is basically that the product should fall within the scope of the novel food regulation, because in some cases, either the product might be considered as an additive, as a flavoring, or something else, or simply is not novel. And the second thing that we had to make sure is that all the elements which are prescribed in the relevant implementing rules, are in. In that case, also, following the transparency regulation that yesterday there were some reference about, the allegedly, lack of transparency in the context of the this process, there is an obligation by the applicant to submit, to notify all the studies used in support of an application to EFSA in advance. And this is the kind of things that we check together with EFSA, in the context of the validity check. Once the application is considered valid, in that sense, it takes a bit of time. In that case, by default, any new novel is sent to EFSA for a risk assessment, and EFSA has 9 months to carry out the assessment. And indeed, during this risk assessment process, they can stop the clock, in order to request additional information. Once the opinion is adopted and published, the Commission has 7 months to prepare the legal act by means what we call an implementing regulation, and then we present it to the standing committee, which consists of member states and chaired by the Commission. And if the member states vote in favor, in other words, that the committee gets a favorable opinion, the legal act will be subsequently adopted by the Commission. This is pretty much the process, but indeed also there are some cases where there is no need to send the application to EFSA, and then we decided with the member states that in case does not pose any safety concern, for example, we're talking about particular extension of uses of already authorized novel food, or a particular chain identification which does not require a safety assessment. Okay. Other thing that we talk about is the novel food regulation provides the possibility of applicant to request confidentiality and data protection. In terms of confidentiality and based on the transparency regulation, so what we need to understand is that an applicant requests certain elements in the application to be treated as confidential. When the Commission asks EFSA to deliver an opinion, EFSA is responsible for assessing the confidentiality. They have particular timeline to do so. They have really 10 weeks in order to send the decision to the applicant. And if the applicant is not happy with that, they have 2 weeks to appeal. And eventually, after appealing, EFSA has 3 weeks to make the final decision. But once the decision of confidentiality has been made, in that sense, the non-confidential version is published on the EFSA portal. In that sense, this is an example of transparency because all the elements which are not considered essentially confidential can easily be seen by everyone. In terms of data protection, which are two terms which are totally different, but it can easily be confused by a number of people, is that the data protection can also be requested by the applicants. That means that there are some elements that they want to protect in order to support the application. By fulfilling the 3 conditions, basically ownership, the possibility that they have the applicant only the right to refer to that data, and EFSA has to indicate in its opinion that without that data they couldn't have made the evaluation. By fulfilling these 3 conditions, the applicant will have the right of marketing that product in exclusivity for 5 years. Okay, that is a way to protect, in a way, the investment. But does not prevent other applicants from submitting an application for the same novel food. I'll give you a number of examples of alternative protein as novel food. First of all, it's about we already authorized a number of plant-based novel protein. You can see here on the screen about plant-based proteins such as partially hydrolyzed protein from spent barley and rice, the mung bean protein. We have also partially fatty rapeseed powder, pea and rice protein fermented by shiitake mushroom. So you can see a number of them already authorized under novel food. Also, we have authorized novel fruit from algae, yeast, or microorganisms such as the microalgae, the dried tetracell michui, and yeast. We have also a number of authorized insects as well, which is part of the alternative protein. And indeed, we have a number of cell-based products isolated from plants with this apple fruit cell culture biomass. And we have right now the first application with this, a duck cell from cell culture submitted in July 2024, which is an ongoing application. Indeed, we have a number of challenges and expectations. On one hand, it's very creative because we need to shift to more sustainable green production. But at the same time, alternative protein may challenge some well-embedded traditional things because, as you know, the cell-based product, is considered a potential threat to conventional, farming technique, particularly conventional meat, and they are creating, a lot of political issues for the time being. Now we're moving on to alternative protein in feed. So we have pretty much two pieces of regulation in the area of feed. This is the feed hygiene regulation. That's the first one, the 183/2005. And the second one is about the regulation on the placing on the market and use and feed. We'll try to briefly describe about what we mean by that. The important thing to bear in mind is that the notion of novel feed does not exist in the legislative framework on feed. So the feed regulation basically laid down good hygiene practice and clearly established responsibility for feed business operators. When making this kind of feeding staff, procedures should be based on the hazard principle, and indeed provide a requirement that this feed business operator needs to be registered, and the establishment should be approved. When it comes to this novel, in inverted comma, feed protein, indeed, they are considered feed materials. So that means they are not subject to a pre-market authorization as compared to novel food. Okay, this is a definition which is really required in that regulation. That regulation basically established that the feed can only be placed on the market and used if it's safe. There's no laid down as indicated a pre-market authorization, but the important thing about this feed material is that either they have to be registered under the EU catalog of feed materials, or in that case, it can also be listed in the feed materials register. We have an example of cell-based food, in particular cultured meat, which is in the feed material register, which is used in pet food, in that case. That regulation as well provides, a list of materials which are prohibited for use in feedstuff. It's about all waste obtained from different phases of treatments. Also, we need to bear in mind that other legislation also may apply in the context of feed. Okay, so that's pretty much the presentation. Thank you very much.